Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. DEI marketing has been a hot topic across our network recently. Given the incredible importance that higher education marketing has had, does have, and will have in representing the stories of all of our students, regardless of their backgrounds, cultures, or identities, it's especially pivotal that we learn how to authentically attract, engage, and inspire the next generation of students. What you are about to hear are 3 excerpts from recent conversations that 3 of our creators recently had on DEI marketing. Jaime Hunt on Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, Diana Kibbolds on Talking Tactics, and Allison Turcio on The Application. In this first clip, you'll hear Jaime Hunt, who identifies as a queer woman, speak with Kevin Tyler, who shares his journey about being an openly gay Black man in higher education. Kevin offers a beautiful personal story and also shares his thoughts on why diverse leadership and diverse marketing are pivotal to the future of student recruitment.
For our listeners, if you've listened to me before, you probably know I identify as a queer woman. And Kevin, I think you identify as a gay man. And so I think that gives us a unique perspective on this topic. But I would love to hear what your journey has been as a gay man in higher ed.
It's funny. I think it's a really great question. I've never been asked this question before. And I show up into rooms my authentic self all of the time. I am very unapologetic in that. It took me a lot of time and a lot of work to get to that point. But I'm very, very proud of who I am. I'm very comfortable with who I am. And I know that that is not the case for a lot of people. And so I try to take up the spaces that mean something to me and that I have a say in. And not that I'm trying to represent the community, but I want to be a voice for it when a voice is needed. And so my path throughout higher education has been one, and really through every job, where I want to keep a close eye on equity and equality and kindness and respect. And no matter what kind of business, no matter what kind of trajectory or vision you have for the business, equity and equality, diversity, inclusion, belonging, all of these words that we hear so often on college campuses now mean so much. And it's not one of those things that you can just talk about. You have to be about. And I am often so honored and very pleased and not shy at all about reminding people who need to be reminded about, like, we are here for all. We should be here for all. I never want to have an active role in inviting people to places where they might feel harmed because of who they are. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important for marketers to be the voice of progress, because we are the people who have to know and be fluent in so many different cultures and activities and groups of people and communities about all the things that are happening on a campus. And I think that my trajectory into higher ed, being an openly gay, and I always add openly Black man, is that I have a perspective. And it's a perspective that isn't always represented in a lot of rooms. There are not a lot of people who do what I do who look like me and love like me. And I think it's very easy to talk about communities as if they are far off or far flung from the room that we are just making decisions in, when really they're all inside the room, or at least they should be all inside the room. And so I always want to make sure that the communities that I'm a part of are represented in decisions, because we deserve to be. And that's not a business decision. It's not a personal decision. It's just a human decision.
Yeah. Have you been out for your entire career?
Yeah, I came out when I was 16. I was on my way to school, and I told my mom, I looked at her dead in the face and said, "I don't think I'm straight." And I got out of the car and onto the bus. And by the time I got home from school, she had become a member of PFLAG, had gone down to Stonewall and had done all the research. She took the day off, of course, but she had done all of this work to become more fluent in the ways that I would need her to be as I grew up. And she went on to become like the premier statewide speaker for PFLAG. PFLAG, for folks who don't know, is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And she became one of their like premier statewide speakers. She would travel all over the state of Ohio, giving these talks at high schools and parent-teacher associations. And I was really very lucky to have a family who regarded pride in who we are as as highly important. I know that it's not everyone's story in that regard, but I have been out for my entire professional career and have been proudly so.
I'm so happy to hear that. And I'm so happy to hear that your family was like, yeah, we're all in on this.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, coming from a Black family, half of whom is somewhat religious, I wasn't sure what the response would be, but I feel very, very lucky that it was what it was, and they're cool people.
I love that for you. I didn't come out until I was 42, and I was at Miami University, and I thought I was just a really good ally. Like I was always advocating for our LGBTQ community. And then I'm like, you know what? You've known for a really long time. You've known since you were like 14. And it's time to really embrace who you authentically are. And there's a lot of bi-erasure in the world and a lot of like people who say you don't count because you're in a straight passing relationship. But I see it as like, I felt a lot of, I don't know if shame is quite the right word, but for my attraction to women, I felt like I was not normal. I'm putting that in air quotes.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I feel like being part of the community is important and to represent that viewpoint in a cabinet setting and making sure I'm going to the lavender graduations so that they see that somebody in their cabinet understands what their experience has been really, really important to me. But I genuinely was like, I'm just a rockin' ally. It's just like I'm all in on this. Apparently very selfishly.
I think we all come to it on a different timeline. I'm a firm believer that, there is a day when the pain of hiding who you are is greater than the joy of honestly stepping into who you are authentically. And my day was, March 16th when I was 16 years old. And others, I know people, friends of mine here in LA who came out when they're in their 50s. And there's no right time. There's no right way. It is all such a personal thing, which is why it's so important for industries like higher ed to accommodate and respect and understand where people are coming from and what they're bringing to your campus communities, because it's all so good. I think it's easy to gloss over the cultures and the individualism and the identities and the desires of people when you're trying to create brand allegiance. Come be a Bobcat, come be a whatever. People are coming into that as different people, and we need to talk to all of them in a way that they can understand and they can see themselves in.
Absolutely. And we are all coming to it with identities that intersect, whether it's race, ethnicity, national origin, immigration status, ability. I mean, we're not a monolith.
We are not a monolith. Yeah. Every campus has a diversity all of its own, either visible or not visible. And people should be able to see themselves in any campus community who promises that they will fit and belong.
Yeah. So from your perspective, how can universities really effectively demonstrate their commitment to inclusivity and support for LGBTQ students?
There's lots of ways. I think that this expands beyond just LGBTQIA plus individuals. I think if you're going to say something, you have to do it and be it, right? And so if you're saying we're safe and welcoming and you for all, and you belong here and we welcome everyone, I would hope that you have some sort of fluency in what that means, right? If you have GLBTQIA students coming in to your campus, understanding what needs they might have and having those supports in place already, or at least working on them, is going to be an indication of your fluency and readiness for this community to be on your campus. I think that it's so easy to slap a rainbow sticker on something, or have some sort of like top level indication or communication that signifies that you understand what that thing means, that piece of culture. But it's quite a different thing to actually serve the community that you are inviting. And I think that things like asking what your pronouns are if you're learning remotely or in person. I mean, it's a fair question no matter how the education is being delivered. I think that's an indication. And then following through on referring to that person as they wish to be referred to. I think that it should not always be framed or couched in, we have mental health and suicide services for GLBTQ students. I mean, that is part of it, but it's not like our entire story isn't like trauma and pain all the time, right? Like, where are the celebrations of gay love and gay life and gay living, and where are the gay faculty members, and what are they doing, and how are they contributing to the community? Have they been given space to talk about the things that are important to the GLBTQIA community? I think that making sure that there is diversity in your leadership, and not from a numbers counting perspective, but if you're qualified people who happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or otherwise, they should they should be part of a leadership team. And seeing people who are in leadership, who are part of your community, is a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing to see a gay president. It's a very powerful thing. I have never had a Black male teacher in my entire life. And when I go to college campuses and see Black male teachers, I am reminded of what an absence, what a gap it was in my experience. And I just think it's important to have representation at all levels of everything, because we are a talented group of people, and we deserve to take up space and be able to make decisions, et cetera. And I just feel very strongly that those are some of the indications that prospective students and staff members and faculty members look to see how fluent you are in the spaces that mean the most to them.
If you liked this clip, we highly recommend you listen to the full episode linked in the show notes below. And if you like the format of this show, consider subscribing to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO wherever you get your podcasts. In this next clip, you'll hear Day Kibbolds, host of the Talking Tactics podcast, chat with Mickey Collins, who created a podcast for the University of Chichester, focusing on authentic and honest stories from minority and underrepresented groups on campus. This initiative, which aimed to present real, unfiltered stories, significantly increased the university's social media reach and engagement, and it earned several awards for its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Keep listening to hear how the Chichester podcast exceeded expectations and became so much more important to the campus community than Mickey and her team could ever have imagined.
All right, so let's talk about this podcast series. Take us back to kind of the start, orient us where you were, point, time, and place, and what were you trying to do or solve or achieve?
So back in 2019, we decided that we wanted to start recording a podcast. The original series was based off of all of the concerns that we were getting from applicants that were coming in that September. So we decided to make an 8-episode podcast series based on that. It was always my aim to do one about diversity and inclusion, but we never really knew how we were ever going to get to that point. Because we'd had quite a lot of backlash before, or we shared diversity and inclusion content quite cautiously, depending on any backlash we might have thought we would have had. So yes, that was the idea, was that we would do a podcast series about other things first, get it down so that we knew what we could do then going forward.
Okay. And why did you have this kind of hope and this focus on wanting to feature diversity stories?
I think it's because we weren't sharing them. Like, we had these targets to increase ethnic minority applications and to increase diversity and inclusion on campus, but it was something that we either weren't talking about at all, or we were sharing just one person's view, knowing that it was positive. And that's where we were seeing potential backlash coming back of people being like, well, that's not my experience. And because I was looking after the social media accounts as well, I was seeing it firsthand. And I was like, if we are trying to exclusively share positive stories, then we become the problem. And it was just from speaking to more and more students as I'd been in the role for a longer period of time. I knew that everyone had a story to share, and there was, even if we shared negative stuff, there was a lot of positive stuff too. And I think it just became even more important to work out a way that we could actually share these stories.
Okay. So when, you knew podcast was going to be the channel, you really wanted to bring authenticity to this. You wanted to share the good and the bad. So talk to us a little bit about like how that turned into an idea. How did you find students to feature? What types of stories were you looking for? And then for our listeners who haven't quite heard the podcast series, like what type of topics were included in there?
So the original series, I wanted to make sure that it was really honest experiences. So the first series wasn't about diversity and inclusion. It was about other concerns students may have before coming to campus. And it was really important to me that it was really lightly edited and really conversational and really friendly. So once we had that format, that's what we then used for the diversity and inclusion series. So there was a student, I'm going to name him, his name is Ray. He was a trans student at Hi Ray. He was a trans student at the university, and he had a blog that wasn't anything to do with us. He just kind of did it on his own, and we only caught wind of it because he'd mentioned the University of Chichester. And reading through it, it was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. But it was a very honest view of his experience as a trans student at the university in his first 2 semesters, I think, by that point. And just reading through it showed that type of honest and raw experience. Although he shared a couple of things that weren't so positive about the university, the rest of it was extremely positive. And we used that as the basis for the other episodes and was like, if we can do something like this, why couldn't we do this for every minority group? And I think the most interesting part about Ray's blog was that there was one paragraph in it about how before he'd arrived, he'd already been in contact with a few people at the university. One of them was that his academic advisor had his pronouns in his email signature, and he instantly felt safe. And I remember reading that and being like, if something so simple can make someone feel so welcome and safe, why are we not all doing it? So I remember doing it, and then I sent the blog to my manager, and then she did it, and then I didn't say anything. I sent it around to a few other people, and then everyone did it as soon as they read his blog. And we were like, well, how much of an impact could we actually make if something so simple helps so many people? Why are we not all doing it? So that Ray's blog was the initial idea for the series.
I just got chills thinking about that. Just the power of something so simple, and just how that sparked something within you to say, hey, these stories exist in other groups. Let's share them. Let's find them. So how did you find the students to feature in series 3?
So the beautiful thing about Chichester is that the Student Union and University work very closely anyway. So I was already in contact with quite a lot of the students that worked actively with the Student Union. So there was a student who was the LGBTQ plus officer at the time, Riley, who helped me a lot with the LGBT episodes. And then from that point, I then just kept speaking to the different students that I knew. And I was like, these are the types of episodes I'm thinking of recording. Can you recommend anyone? And I really wanted to work with students that we hadn't worked with before as well. I felt that was really important. And we also used our Instagram account, the university's Instagram account, quite heavily. And we just said, like, we're looking to record these 8 episodes. Like, comment in the little Q&A box if you know anybody, or if you feel that you could offer anything. And one of the other things was there was a couple of students that didn't want to record the episodes for various reasons, but they helped us shape them, and we spoke to them to make sure that we had a lot of different views and experiences within the episodes themselves as well.
So what was that list your wish list of episodes?
So it was, let me just get it up, because otherwise this is the big test of memory day.
You can read it. Nobody knows. Nobody can tell.
So there were 8 episodes, which were being a student with disability. I'm going to say that again. So there were 8 episodes, which was being a student with disability, being in the LGBTQ plus community, being a Black student, being a non-binary student, being a trans student, being a person of color, being an international student, and being given a second chance.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Okay. And did you get a lot of response in that little Q&A box?
We did.
Yeah?
There was a few that there was a couple of episodes we already had ideas of people we wanted for, but I was like, I had this idea and I was like, I don't even know if we're going to get enough students to want to do it. And we did. We had so many students, and it was really important to me that we didn't just have one person from those categories for each episode. I really wanted to make sure that we had lots of different students. So, because a lot of them had very different experiences, even though they're in the same minority group. And that was really important to have a conversation about it and make sure that we weren't just showing one person's experience and then trying to say that that's what everybody's going to feel. And I think that's what made the episodes even better.
Tell us about the results of this podcast, from the smallest statistic you want to share to the biggest thing you think you accomplished.
So I think the main thing which we were thinking before we recorded was that because they were quite niche episodes, we knew that there potentially was going to be a small engagement level, and we were fine with that. And just because it was a small engagement level didn't mean that it wasn't bad. It was just because there was a small number of those students on campus and those applying. But when we were recording it, we were like, this is something special. Like, this is like, just everything that all the students were saying was so impactful that we knew that we needed to start sharing the snippets on social media and using it as an educational tool, not just for the applicants or students that related to them. So in terms of the episodes that we recorded, it outperformed the first two series by over double. So it had 2,649 views between the 8 episodes and 312 audio listens. It's also worth mentioning that Chichester has 5,500 students. So these are big numbers for us.
Yeah.
And then through the social media snippets, we reached nearly 50,000 people just from those 8 episodes.
Wow.
Which I think blew our minds. And I think when we were recording it, we knew that it could be something good.
If you liked this clip, we highly recommend you listen to the full episode linked in the show notes below. And if you liked this podcast, consider subscribing to Talking Tactics wherever you get your podcasts. And in this final clip, you'll hear Allison Turcio, host of the Application Podcast, chat with Raman Bala, the AVP of University Web Services at Rochester Institute of Technology. This conversation is about website accessibility. Yes, a different but just as important aspect of DEI marketing. A systematic approach to accessibility can revolutionize marketing efforts and emphasize the role of marketers as advocates for inclusivity. This conversation offers valuable insights for marketers looking to enhance outreach and engagement through accessible digital practices. If you enjoy this clip, check out the application wherever you get your podcasts.
Can you talk about sort of those bare minimum requirements, the legal requirements, but then what are some of the additional measures that we need to be thinking about to make sure we are being truly accessible and truly inclusive?
Yeah, this is a really interesting space where doing the right thing is actually good, very good for your business as well. Accessible websites tend to be more user-friendly. They have clearer navigation and they have a more logical structure, so that benefits everyone. Many of the accessibility techniques, and we'll talk about quite a few, but for example, alt text or descriptive headings, those align with good SEO practices as well. So web accessibility can help improve your search engine rankings, and we all want that. In addition to the benefits to the users, web accessibility has several business benefits. So according to the CDC, about 61 million adults in the United States live with a disability. According to the World Health Organization, 15% of the planet's population struggles with some form of disability. So you can imagine, by making websites accessible, universities are increasing their potential customer base, and they're demonstrating their commitment to inclusivity. So it can have a positive brand reputation impact as well, right? So it's a win-win. You make your stuff accessible and it's good for you.
I was recently attending a webinar by OHO Interactive, and they were talking about how students search for college. And funny enough, a lot of them start with Google, who has the best psychology program in the Northeast, that kind of thing. But a lot of them are using AI now too to start answering those questions. But the second thing that they do is they go to the college's website. So what you're saying has implications for two of those things. One, that the search engine optimization, right? That you're coming up for what the student is searching for. But two, then when they get to your website, what is that experience like for them? We really have to be putting ourselves in their shoes, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned AI. We are all at a stage where we're trying to figure out how to leverage AI to improve our material online. And there's just not a whole lot of clear answers out there. Like ChatGPT is not obviously going to reveal anytime soon what their sources are and how they've trained their sites. But the general understanding is if you have a good structure on your website, that gets scraped and picked up. So it's just it goes in tandem with SEO. It's good for feeding AI data sources as well.
Are there any newer or emerging standards or guidelines that maybe not everyone knows about that we need to be aware of and be attentive to?
I think that's a what I would say is that everyone should know. Everyone who's in this space should know. I'm not sure everybody does, but I think just having gone to conferences lately over the last couple of years, I see a lot more interest. I see a lot of people having a high level of familiarity, but I also see a lot of people at the point where they're just now starting to ask questions. So they might be a little bit behind the curve, but that's okay. They're starting to ask the questions and starting to learn more. So there are standards that are out there. Most organizations, even beyond universities, they tend to follow a standard called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. We call it WCAG, and it's set forth by the W3C organization. They're the ones that are sort of leading the charge, and it's a very well published guideline and standard. So they've had something out. The standard 2.1, WCAG 2.1, was the most recent version, which was originally published in 2018. And they've been keeping it up to date with enhancements and as they learn more and get feedback. And W3C had planned to publish version 2.2 as a completed standard this year. And I was on their website today, and I want to say it went live just this week, quite possibly today. Yeah, so it's real interesting. And, we're going to start looking at what that entails. We've had some people in my team keep an eye out on it just to make sure there's not drastic changes, and we're still learning, but we do know it's going to be backwards compatible. Next, the standard we will get is probably going to be a very major revision. It's going to be WCAG 3. It's in the exploratory phase right now. Our understanding is it's going to have a different structure, it's going to have a different conformance model, and much broader scope. So there's going to be a lot of learning to do when that standard comes out. And there's going to be a lot of work to be done to then conform to that standard.
And I imagine doing the work to conform to where the standard's in now probably sets you up for an easier time when those ones come out. So we really need to be working at this as we speak, even though something new is forthcoming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're conforming to the current standard, you are going to be much better placed to address the new standards when they come out.
I'd love to dive in a bit on RIT and some examples because I know our listeners love examples. So can you share a success story or an example of how RIT or another school too has significantly been able to improve accessibility of their website?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, about 4 years back, we launched the university's web presence the way it exists today. And it was the first time we undertook a comprehensive redesign of all university websites. It's a fairly large university. We had 800 plus web properties, which is quite a bit. And they had grown in a very ad hoc way for over 2 decades. And a lot of that stuff was not accessible. I mean, it had lots of issues, obviously, given their age, but certainly accessibility was one of them because many of them were created before there were standards, before there was any awareness. So during our redesign process, we followed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to inform our design. And by incorporating it right from the beginning of our development and design phase, we found some really good success. Our core web presence now scores well above the education industry benchmark when it comes to website accessibility. And we weren't really looking to beat any benchmarks. We just wanted our stuff to be accessible. But just because we did it from the ground up, rather than fixing old sites, we just put out new sites that were not only built on new technology and new branding, but they happen to be accessible right out of the box. So that, I think, is certainly a success story. But what's more meaningful is when you get some kind of feedback from a user that is actually impacted by the I heard from somebody a few weeks back, and they pointed out something so obvious, something that people without disabilities just take for granted. And that person had some disability, and they really appreciated that we put in the effort to address that one thing. And that was so meaningful to me. And, that's just one example where somebody shared something specific with me, but I know and I'm hoping that there's several people out there that are just benefiting from the things that we are doing.
Everyone who listens to this podcast or any of the episodes, I think knows by now, I'm a very audience-centered approach kind of marketer, student-centered, audience-centered, whoever the audience might be. And I love this idea of starting with the standards instead of building something and then trying to go in and sort of layer them on and fix everything so that they're meeting the standards, because it's actually a very audience-centered approach to start there, because you're already thinking about how other people and different types of people will be able to access the content that you're putting out there.
Yeah, I would say we were just very lucky in that situation where we had that opportunity where the university went through rebranding. We were looking at our web presence. So everything kind of aligned. But I think if you have a web presence that's actively working for you and you don't have any plans to make major changes, I don't think that should hold you back from making it accessible. It's a different approach, but it should, old or new, it should certainly be accessible.
How do you find your accessibility score? How can people go and get their accessibility score to see how they're doing?
So that's a really interesting question. There is no test per se. There is no one single authority that gives you a pass or a fail. In the end, really, who's the best judge is people with disabilities. And there's going to be different people with different types of disabilities and different levels of disabilities. We use a tool, it's called Site Improve, and we'll probably talk about that again. And that tool is used by lots of for-profit, non-for-profit, and also higher ed organizations. So they provide you with a score. Now, this score is only specific to them, but they have a really large user base. So we kind of use their scores to benchmark.
Feels like it's important to have a baseline as you're embarking on this. You have to know where you need to improve, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what are some specific actionable steps? I want you to picture this. I'm going to end this podcast when we're done having this little chat. And I'm going to walk into my team that works on the website, and I'm going to tell them to look for what? I'm going to tell them to take what step? I imagine for almost any college, there's perhaps some low-hanging fruit out there that we can just go and start taking care of right away. So what are some of those steps that we should be thinking about to be more inclusive and accessible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it begins with having truly an understanding and appreciation for web accessibility. You need to know it is necessary. And that includes generating broad awareness among key stakeholders who are responsible for building and maintaining the website at your university. There are going to be web designers, there are going to be web developers, and their content publishers. These are the folks that are going to do the work. But it's also important to generate awareness for university leadership because you're going to need their support when it comes to getting resources. But once awareness is established and you have the resources, what you would want to do is have these stakeholders or have somebody assigned dedicated to understanding the standards and understanding the requirements, what is needed to make the websites accessible. It's not like a quick checklist, it's a rather involved process. So you'd want to spend some resources and allocate some time for that. Once you have that understanding, then that's when the actual work starts. You begin the work, you put those features in, you do the coding, you whatever you need to do to make the sites accessible. And in tandem with doing the work, I think it's very important to develop a documented process that can be followed. If you're doing it in an ad hoc way, chances of failure are higher. But if you have it documented, you will, I think, have a better chance at making your sites accessible. We developed a pretty well documented and comprehensive process to manage our web accessibility, and it was shared pretty broadly. So folks who needed to know their slice, they knew. And then sort of in the development side of things, we are a Drupal shop. That's what we use. So what we did was we developed a base Drupal theme that has all the necessary accessibility features. So in your case, if you're using a different content management system or no content management system, or hopefully you are using a content management system because of how it makes sense. But you're going to want to put in those features in your base code. So when we build new sites using a base theme, almost out of the box, they are accessible. In addition to our documented process, we also came up with guidelines and checklists for our web developers to follow as they build these websites. Before a site is launched, it is checked for accessibility compliance. We use the online tools like SiteImprove. We also use browser plugins. And after the site is launched, and now you have a number of sites, number of web properties, we use the tools to continuously scan existing sites for issues. So in addition to all of this automated stuff, the tools have limitations. So to compensate for limitations, we actually spot check at least the high visibility sites. So I think those are some of the things that you would want to do. It's a staged approach. You wouldn't be doing all of these things together. But like I said, starts with awareness and then put in the resources, get an understanding of what needs to be done, then do the work, and then put in some processes that ensure that the work that you've done, the integrity is maintained through the life cycle of the website.
What you're proposing to me sounds like a systematic approach and a systemic approach, that it's not just, okay, today let's go check some sites, make sure the alt text on the photos here are good. You really have a plan for what you're looking for and who's going to go find those issues and fix those issues, and then constantly be checking to make sure that's been accomplished. That's really admirable.
Thanks for tuning in to this special episode. The Enrollify Network has podcasts for presidents, marketers, admission professionals, and so much more. Find your next favorite podcast at enrollify.org. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.